very good evening to you. You're joining us on Vantage Point, telecast on TV1. And before we head into the program, I think we need to make a special announcement. Vantage Point was presented with Raigam Tele Award this month. And a special gratitude, and we would like to extend our gratitude to all our viewers watching us and for all the support that has been extended to us throughout the years. And today joining me is Dr. Tilaka.
Well, congratulations, Stephanie.
Thank you very much,
you
Doctor.
Quite rightly collected the award for the presenter of the best
And it's definitely
talk
teamwork.
show.
Yes, definitely
So,
teamwork.
well done.
Thank you very much.
Pat ourselves on the back. So that's a good start.
I think we all need to pat ourselves on the back because it has been going on for years now.
Yeah, we won a state award.
Yes, and we won,
last
and it
year.
adds up to all our collection of awards. That
Mahina got the
That's
award
right.
last year for the same program.
That's
So we've
right.
been doing okay.
We've been doing okay. So just to start off today's edition of Vantage Point, something that has really got our attention over the week, where there is a lot of debate over whether the central bank governor should remain in his position or not, whether his tenure should be extended or not. And Minister Lakshman Kiriyala very famously made a statement saying that he in fact should remain in his position as central bank governor. What are your views on that, Doctor?
Well, Stephanie, I mean, this is both the right and the wrong place for me to talk about it because no station has done more to explore the issue of the bond scam, the central bank bond scam, than your station, and especially your economics and financial affairs specialist, Faraz Shaukat Ali. I mean, he's done some brilliant investigative journalism for the electronic media by taking this whole thing apart. And I wish, somebody put those segments together before this decision is made. I think it'll be distressing if there is no change. Now, I must say that Mr. Arjuna Mahendra's father is known to me. He is a distinguished diplomat, Charlie Mahendra, and Arjuna himself. My wife and I met him in Singapore. He's a very affable, very nice guy, obviously a smart guy. So as a person, I have absolutely no problems with him. But from the get-go, President Sirisena rightly had his reservations. I remember in 2015, President Sirisena was reluctant to appoint him. And I think Minister Champika Ranawaka was also raising questions. Now, the main issue at that time was that he was a citizen of Singapore. He had renounced his Sri Lankan citizenship. So it is a question of giving this post of the governor of the central bank to the foreigner in that sense, technically. And to someone who obviously didn't identify with Sri Lanka, had no roots. I mean, he had just severed his roots with Sri Lanka. But he was appointed at the insistence of Prime Minister Wickremesinghe. Now, one would have thought that having started off with a little controversy, there would be much more care. Instead, you had the infamous and very, very huge bond scam. I'm not saying he had anything to do with it, but as Faraz has pointed out on this station many times, there are questions. I'm putting it very mildly. There are questions. And there are doubts which may be even called reasonable. Now, none of that has been investigated with the same diligence as the FCID and SIABOC or whatever they call it, going to misdeeds of the past. We are still paying, and we will be paying for a very long time to come, for the bond scam, for the leakage of funds. There's a huge sum involved, some couple of $1 billion eventually, as it grows. Now, with such question marks, It's not a surprise that powerful members of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party faction in the government want to rid themselves of this burden. Minister S.B. Lanka, Minister Dilan Pereira, they've spoken out openly on this. But Lakshman Kiriyala of the UNP says no, there won't be a change. So in a way this is a test case. We shall know who calls the shots and on what issues. Because this is not a clear-cut case of somebody who's in the right and who's being victimized. There are serious question marks here. We are in a very grey area, if I may say so.
Why is there a need to keep him in his position? As in, why is there so much of defense?
I don't see a need to keep him in his position. It is just a question of eyeballing. I think Prime Minister Wickremesinghe wants to show that he calls the shots. This is somebody who's close to him. And he wants to show that he stands by his guys and he is making it a test case in a battle of political wills between the UNP, or rather between his faction of the UNP and his mates and cronies and so on and so forth, and the SLFP coalition partner, including President Sirisena. So let's see how this goes. This is a very interesting test case.
Is it the case when it comes to the country's foreign policy as well? Because
oh yeah.
And in what sense does it say that it's a more UNP-led foreign policy than it's a coalition government foreign policy? Sponsored foreign policy. What is our ideology? As in, do we have an ideology behind our foreign policy?
Well, the President does. I would say an idea rather than an ideology. And it's a good idea. At the symposium on foreign policy at the BMICH, which President Sirisena spoke at and attended throughout, there was a documentary that was shown before the proceedings really started. And there you have President Sirisena explaining to the UN General Assembly in New York that his foreign policy is, and I quote, that of an Asia-centric middle path, unquote. Now that's a very good idea. It's the right idea for Sri Lanka. And though the foreign policy of the first term of the Rajapaksa administration was very successful and cleared the space for us to prevail over terrorism, the second term was a bit of a mess. Bit of a disaster. So President Sirisena's definition of a Asia-centric middle path is the right policy for Sri Lanka at all times.
How well is it going to be when it comes to the Western countries? How well is that going to work out for us?
Well, Stephanie, you know, when you have friends and the West, they're not our enemies, but you have to understand your friends' limits. Thanks to the WikiLeaks cables and to the more recent revelation of the emails of the former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, which the Senate insisted she hand over because she'd taken them with her when she left. We now know what Washington's attitude to Sri Lanka was, because there is a cable dated the 4th of May 2009 signed by Secretary of State Clinton herself, and there is an email same day, May 4th, 2009, which documents a conference held in Washington, D.C., which show us very clearly what was going on. There was a strong attempt by Secretary of State Clinton, working with British Foreign Secretary David Miliband, to stop the Sri Lankan war from finishing off the Tiger leadership. Now, that doesn't make her our enemy. That doesn't make Washington our enemy by any means. It's a friend. But we have to understand that there were certain compulsions which put us at loggerheads, because we needed to finish this 30-year war in a manner that Mr. Prabhakaran couldn't leave and restart it, because he'd done it so often. So, the West contains very strong Tamil voter blocks, and these are dominated by the political Tamil diaspora, which is still quite hardline. They're quite hawkish. I mean, they commemorate Prabhakaran and Mahavira Day and so on and so forth. So the West is, I mean, it is influenced by some of these lobbies and their own human rights lobbies, international NGOs, liberal opinion. They maintain dual standards because if any terrorist does anything in their country, then they go and bomb the other country. But we had a 30-year war with suicide bombers here, but they wanted us to stop at the last moment. So we have to understand the limits of our friends. We also have to understand that some of our other friends have stood by us more consistently. I'm not just talking about one or two like China, Russia, Cuba and so on. I would say for the most part, Asia has seen eye to eye with us. And in any case, Asia is where we are. We are Asia. Asia is also the fastest growing area economically in the world. So President Sirisena is right when he calls for an Asia-centric middle path. But my point, and I made this publicly with President Sirisena listening, is that while his foreign policy doctrine or concept is correct, it is not the foreign policy that is being practiced by Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, Foreign Minister Mangala Samaraweera and former President Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumarapati. Theirs is not an Asia-centric policy, it's a West-centric policy. It's not a middle path policy, it's a right-wing policy. And it's not a policy of non-alignment, which President Sirisena says he adheres to, but a policy of alignment with the West. So there is an asymmetry. Now, whether this will turn into a fissure, or whether President Sirisena will be able to ensure that his policy is carried out, the policy of the executive is carried out by the entire government, I do not know. I hope that that is the case. But there is also a problem concerning Geneva. Now, we talked about the general concept of an Asia-centric middle path, but there is the specific problem of the UN Human Rights Council. And as the ambassador of China, Ambassador Yi, said in Colombo at a conference of the Regional Center for Strategic Studies a few weeks ago, and this was published in the newspapers, he spoke about the UNHRC resolution, and he said that he hopes that adherence to the UNHRC resolution concerning reconciliation doesn't actually cause problems for reconciliation in Sri Lanka, and it doesn't cause renewed domestic conflict. He went on to say that China's view is that no external entity should interfere in Sri Lanka's internal processes. So, our economically most important friend, or should I say renewed friend, China, renewed because its government had drifted away from China and has now gone back to China for economic support, has said very clearly what it thinks is in our interest and what isn't. Now, I'm not saying we have to adhere to China's policy, but if you talk to the Asian countries, including India, you would see that none of those countries support or practice special courts to try their armed forces when they have fought against and vanquished terrorism. But Prime Minister Wickremesinghe is talking about a special court. He says with local judges, but it's a special court. President Sirisena, on the other hand, has clearly said that he trusts the existing courts of Sri Lanka, and he thinks that they're quite independent, sufficiently independent, especially after the 19th Amendment. He says he trusts the Sri Lankan lawyers. Foreign Minister Mangala Samaraweera says he's going to have independent special counsel for this mechanism. What do you mean by independent? Are Sri Lankan lawyers not independent? How are these lawyers, counsel going to be more independent than the existing counsel who practice in Sri Lankan courts? Is it more independent than the AG's department? And if so, how and why? And why independent special counsel? What's so special about them? What's wrong with the Attorney General's department? Now, this is very dubious indeed, and it is not the declared policy of President Sirisena. I would say repeatedly declared.
The government of Sri Lanka siding with Western countries and the Westerners, there has been a lot of advantages that we were able to reap, especially the IMF loan. And will it be the same if we were an Asian-centric middle path?
Well, we didn't need the IMF loan before, Stephanie. We need the IMF loan now. Why? I mean, why didn't Mahinda Rajapaksa need the IMF loan? Because he had the Chinese on side. Now, if the UNP government were convinced that the West can help us out, West-centric policy alone can help us out, why did they hit reverse gear and scurry to Beijing and offer Beijing a deal that even Mahinda Rajapaksa didn't? The extent of land offered in relation to the Port City project is larger than that was offered originally by Mahinda Rajapaksa. Why? Because the delay meant that we owe the Chinese more money. And the UNP government has said, we can't give you the money, but you can take more land if you want. That's more land than Mahinda Rajapaksa was willing to give the Chinese. And in Hambantota is much bigger than what was originally promised to the Chinese by the Rajapaksa administration. Now this is reality. Obviously, playing the Western card alone didn't work, which is why Prime Minister Wickremesinghe had to go back to China and offer them a better deal than President Rajapaksa did. Better for the Chinese. Now, let's take the IMF agreement. I read it, at least what was in the newspapers, and I'm very scared. I mean, if I were just some opposition politician, I'd be very happy, because nobody can win votes after implementing those policies that have been signed off on. But I'm not an opposition politician, and therefore I'm very worried. Now, what I read there were the following. Every one of those is a serious problem. One is exchange rate liberalization. Now, why did our economic wizards like Ronnie DeMere not do this when President Jawardhan opened up the economy? Because your rupee will be in free fall. It has fallen under this present UNP government. It may fall much further. You need to stabilize the rupee. Exchange rate liberalization, further liberalization, is potentially very damaging to the value of the rupee, which means to your livelihoods and mine. The second thing is the opening up of the capital account. What Prime Minister Wickremesinghe has said is, we are going to remove all the foreign exchange restrictions. Now, why were those regulations there? This is Mrs. Bandaranaike's government. We've had an open economy since 1977. We had an economic revolution. We had a second wave of the open economy under President Premadasa. Now, why didn't the UNP government do this? Because they were smart. They knew that if you remove all exchange controls, with a mouse click you may have money sucked out of Sri Lanka. That happened, Stephanie, in 1997 in East Asia, the famous East Asian crisis. And it is only Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, Prime Minister at the time of Malaysia, who said, no, I am not going to open up my capital account so that my foreign exchange can be siphoned off just like this. I'm not going to do what the other guys did, and I'm not going to do what the IMF says. And he said, we'll do it our way. And he did, and he turned it around. The others who took the IMF medicine wound up crashing. There were riots in the streets of Indonesia, Jakarta. The government toppled. I mean, I'm not saying that government shouldn't have been toppled. It was Suharto administration. I'm glad it was toppled. But that's what happened when this complete freeing of exchange controls or opening up of the capital account took place. We are going to do that. We have committed ourselves to it. The phrase is a fundamental reset of economic policy. Why do you want to fundamentally reset an economic policy that gave us 8% growth under Jaya Jawardhan, high growth under Premadasa, and very high growth 7% under Mahinda Rajapaksa? You need to make some corrections. You don't need a fundamental reset of something that has worked for you. But that's what we have committed ourselves to. There's something else. That the orientation of the economy will be almost completely outward. Now, I'm for export-led industrialization. But the completely outward orientation means, Stephanie, that you don't really care about your domestic market. Now, if you don't care about your domestic market, what that means is you don't really care whether your people have enough spending power, purchasing power, whether real wages have gone up, because you're oriented entirely to the external markets. So, you neglect the purchasing power of your consumers. You can allow real wages to be cut because you're looking outward, you're not looking inward. And you're also vulnerable, Stephanie, because the world economy is in crisis. I mean, come on, look at Greece, look around. This is not the time to have a totally externally oriented economic policy. It's like when there's a virus going around, you go around kissing people without a mask.
And does this mean that we are looking at a decline in entrepreneurship in Sri
Oh,
Lanka?
absolutely. I mean, look at the small and medium entrepreneurs. There was a big meeting the other day, a caucusing of the SMEs. And they're very worried because, under UNP government, entrepreneurs are supposed to do well, but they're not. Even the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce has sounded certain, note of alarm. But certainly the SMEs, which are very vital. President Premadas was very concerned about the SMEs, I remember. They are under pressure now. Why is that? Because we are just importing the formulae of the IMF and the West and trying to implement it here. Now, that is not what happened under President Jayawardena. When he opened up the economy, he was very careful. He and Ronnie DeMille. President Premadas was very careful. I remember an incident. He had been abroad. One of those rare occasions that he went abroad. When he came back, he found that his economic bureaucrats had come to some agreement with the IMF and the World Bank restructuring Jana Savia. What he did was he got his economic bureaucrats, including Mr. Pascalingham, he's still around, he's working for the government, he can be asked whether what I'm saying is true. He got them to come into his office, he got them to sit down, and he played a video cassette. What was on the video cassette? There was a lady, a poor lady, a Jana Savia recipient, called Violet Lalini, I still remember. Violet Lalini used to get on the platform and make this speech about how Jana Savia had lifted her out of poverty. He got the bureaucrats to listen to the whole thing. And he said, that is what I have promised the people, and that is the change that's been made in their lives. Did you read my manifesto? And he opens this, this valise, and he pulls out his manifesto. He's one president who had his manifesto all sort of tabbed. And he said, and he read it out to them. This is what I promised. Now, you go and tell the IMF and the World Bank guys why you cannot do what you promised them in my absence. Now, that's what the UNP was really like. But now, we have agreed to a program, including, now I've listed some of the things in the program. The other thing is that the state-owned enterprises will be rationalized, i.e. we are going to basically ditch employees from the state-owned enterprises. Now, that alone, Stephanie, will cause, that IMF package will cause huge economic and social instability in this country, and it won't help reconciliation because people aren't very generous towards other communities when they are feeling economic pain anywhere in the world. So I think it's very, very bad, and it goes against the best practices of previous UNP government.
What do you think will the outcome be 2 weeks from now at the UNHRC session? How much of an advantage do you think Sri Lanka would have in the platform of the UNHRC?
Well, obviously we are not mobilizing our friends, and President Sirisena has in the last 1.5 years renewed relationships all around the campus, which is a good thing. I said that publicly. He has expanded our global space. But what he has gone and done, he's cleared a space for us. that space had been shrinking in the second term, not the first term, of the Rajapaksa administration. Now President Sirisena has cleared some of that space, but the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister and the former President have not been negotiating in the UNHRC or with the IMF to strike a hard bargain which is in the interest of Sri Lanka. They are not guided by the national interest of Sri Lanka, and that's why I say there is an asymmetry between President Sirisena's pragmatic policies and the pro-Western mimicry of Prime Minister Wickremesinghe and Foreign Minister Mangala Samaraweera.
And we will have more to discuss probably the next week when we have our show on the 20, probably the next week, and we will be having an extended discussion on this because the UNHRC session is next week, and the oral statement will be delivered. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Jaya Tilaka, and we will be meeting all of you all next week. And in the meantime, if you need to comment or even post anything or comments or your views, you can log on to our website, and also you can follow our Twitter handle at Newsfirst_EN for more. Take care.